Watching Kyle's unboxing videos again?
Yeah, he always finds the coolest... No way! A robot dog? Gotta ask where he got it.
Or use your Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Just draw a circle around the dog on your screen, and it shows you where to buy it right in the app.
Whoa, I just learned a new trick. And that for once, I beat Kyle to the next big thing.
Circle it, find it with the new Galaxy S24 Ultra and circle the search with Google. Get yours now at Samsung.com. Internet connection required. Results may vary based on visuals.
Hello, Duke fans, and welcome to episode 380 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. It is Sunday, January 16th, 2022. You are not listening to this episode until at least Monday, January 17th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day here in the United States. Maybe you're even listening Tuesday morning or Tuesday during the day, January 18th, 2022, the day that Duke plays at Florida State in men's basketball. We are recording this episode soon after we recorded our NC State recap. So if there was any sort of interesting news, mildly interesting news on Monday or Sunday evening that came around, you may notice we're not talking about it, but we have plenty else to talk about between previewing that Florida State game and a cool Duke run-in that one of the members of the podcast had over the weekend. So I am your host for this episode. I am Sam Klein. I am joined by Jason Evans and Donald Wine. Guys, we don't need to spend too much time asking how you are because I think that your answers would be exactly the same as they were in our last episode. But Jason, hello again.
So my answer is a little different because as I look out the window, it is snowing in Atlanta. I want everyone to understand for most of the country, that's like not that big a deal. In Atlanta, it means that our store shelves have been pillaged of any items that possibly could be useful during an extended snow break. It means that the roads are going to be treacherous. It is just my city just does not handle snow at all.
That's actually somewhat terrifying. Please stay inside. Donald Wine is also here. Donald, how are you?
I'm doing good, just as it was an hour ago. I did go to the store before we recorded this morning so that I can get all my supplies because, Jason, that snow, and we will also get ice and sleet and freezing rain. We are getting all of it, and it is headed our way. So fear not. It should be over soon, but you're just sending it all my way. Come on, bring me all the winter weather.
I think since the beginning of last week, the wind chill where I live has been under 0 degrees Fahrenheit as much as it's been over 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So now I'm just hardened for this sort of thing. This is just regular for me. Don't even bother me anymore. All right, guys, as I said, we need to preview Duke's game against Florida State on Tuesday. Florida State, of course, is one of those teams that is often one of the best in the ACC. I think that still holds true this year, at least by the metrics, although their overall ranking this year is not exactly where they normally would be. I said that we also have some fun audio that we need to play for you. But let's start with the Florida State game, which happens Tuesday night. I'm not sure exactly when you, the listener, are consuming this, but that game is Tuesday night. It's a 9 p.m. tip in Tallahassee. So Duke is going on the road, which has been somewhat challenging for the Blue Devils this season. Not that they've played many road games, but it is somewhat challenging. And they're going to play Leonard Hamilton's team that has a fair amount of talent. They have some skill. They have some experience. Donald, I'm going to let you kick off our Florida State preview here because you like looking at the results and sort of where this team has come from. So why don't you start us off? Tell us a bit about Florida State.
Well, like you said, Sam, they are doing fairly well, but they're not doing as well as they have been, we've used to see from Florida State in previous years. They're 10-5 on the season. They are 4-2 in the ACC. I think most notably their best wins have been over the last 3 games in the conference. They won on Saturday against Syracuse, which, mind you, is the second time they've faced Syracuse this season already. They are done with Syracuse. They did lose to Syracuse last month, but they've previously beat Louisville and Miami. Those are probably the best 3 wins that they had. And I'll talk a little bit about the Miami game because I think it was interesting. That particular game, they won by 1 point. They were at home. hosting Miami. And at that point, Miami had just come off of a road win here at Duke and was undefeated in the conference. They had great performances on Miami side from Charlie Moore and from Cameron McGusty. But in the end, Florida State won at the free throw line. They were 13 of 16, which doesn't seem like much. But when they were able to get to the free throw line, they were able to knock down shots. They didn't have as many made baskets as Miami did. They really didn't wow anything with rebounds or distribution of assists. They just kept fighting and kept using the momentum of the crowd to will them to this victory. And again, at the end of the day, going 13 for 16 from the line, they made 6 more free throws than Miami. They end up winning by 1 point. So every one of those we talked about on Duke's side, where it is essential to make free throws, especially down the stretch. Florida State was able to do that, and they were able to preserve the victory against Miami. So this is going to be a team that's not going to quit. We know Leonard Hamilton very, very well. I think we all agree that he is one of our favorite non-Duke coaches in the ACC. But the man always has Florida State ready to play. And for all of us Duke fans, we remember every single time we go to Florida State, it is always a battle. We have lost several big games there, a lot of times as the number 1 team in the nation. So Florida State is not going to be scared by us. They're going to be ready for this fight, and that crowd will be energized and ready to go. So Duke is going to have to come out like they did in the second half of the Wake Forest game, determined to take everybody in that gym out of the basketball game early and make sure the momentum stays Duke blue.
Yeah, Donald, to your point about making the free throws, Tallahassee is one of those great great spots for ACC basketball. The crowd always gets into it when Duke comes to visit. So this Duke team got to enjoy playing, I think, a little sloppy and a little overextending themselves against NC State. That you can get away with when you're at home and when the crowd is in your favor. It's a totally different vibe when you are playing a hostile ACC crowd. So that is going to be an interesting thing to watch. Jason Evans, I want to give it to you next because you like looking at the advanced stats on this Florida State team, and they are a fascinating bunch this season.
Yeah, so this Florida State team is 53rd in KenPom, and that makes them one of the really disappointing teams in the ACC thus far. A lot of people expected them to be significantly better than this. As Donald mentioned, we're used to Florida State being a top 20 KenPom team. And like Donald mentioned, they've shown those signs of life lately with the 3 straight wins in the ACC. And I think there's a pretty good argument to be made that Florida State is a strong contender to be the 3rd best team in the ACC. Them, Miami, Wake Forest, Notre Dame, those are the teams that are sort of appear to be vying for like that number 3 spot in the ACC, with Duke pretty clearly number 1 and UNC pretty clearly number 2 right now. Like I mentioned, they're 53rd in KenPom. They have the 87th best offense, Florida State does, and the 35th best defense. And I want to talk about that defense first. They really don't allow you to get out and run. They're really good at forcing teams not to fast break and to work late into the shot clock. They aren't quite Virginia in terms of their ability to slow you down, but they're close. Their D is 25th in turnover percentage, thanks to them getting a lot of steals. Their steal percentage is 13.8. That means every time you have the ball on offense, there's a 13.8% chance that Florida State's going to steal it. That's really, really good, like top 10 in the country good. They also block a ton of shots. Their block percentage, 25th in the country. But we know, we've talked in this podcast about the fact that if you go for blocks, you don't get defensive rebounds. They are not a very good defensive rebounding team, so they can be attacked that way. I want to talk about their offense now. They really, as I looked for like, oh, maybe there are things that they do really well and things they don't do well. They don't do anything great on offense. They don't do anything awful, but they don't do anything great. They hit about 35% of their threes. Good, not great. They hit about 50% of their 2-point shots. Good, not great. It's tough to get steals against them. Duke is a team that thrives on getting steals. It'll be difficult, I think, to get steals against them. But sort of weirdly, they are a team that just throws the ball away sometimes. Their turnover percentage is pretty mediocre, not because they give up steals, but because they just turn it over in other ways, which is, kind of weird. The other thing to talk about is their size. According to KenPom, this Florida State team is number 1, the biggest team in college basketball. They have 4 7-footers on the team. Now, 2 of them barely play at all, but the reason that the computers say that this Florida State team is the biggest team in the land is because they quite literally don't have anyone who's small. Like 6'4" Raekwon Evans, 6'4", he's the smallest guy in the team. Most of the time, they're going to have 4 or 5 guys who are 6'6" or taller on the floor. Duke is used to, that sounds sort of similar to what Duke does. Duke is used to having guys like Wendell Moore is used to playing a guy smaller than him. Trevor Keels is used to playing a guy smaller than him. That's not going to be the case against Florida State. It's just not. And the last thing I wanted to mention, we need to find out if Malik Osborne, how badly he's injured. He is a 6'9" senior for them. He's their second leading scorer. He's their leading rebounder. He has really nice touch from 3. Malik Osborne is arguably, he's maybe their first or second best player on the team. He didn't play in their win against Syracuse the other day. He was in a walking boot. He hurt his ankle against Wake Forest. And he's tried to play through it a little bit, but he was not able to play through it at all against Syracuse. He is the guy who would likely match up against Paulo Banchero. For every team, when you play Duke, the key matchup is, do you have someone who has the size and the foot speed to be able to play with Paulo Banchero? Because if they could have size, Paulo will take them outside and go around them. They could have the speed and Paulo will take them inside and power over them, which is what makes Paulo so unique. Malik Osborne is a rare thing in this country in that he is a guy who has the size and he has the foot speed to be able to play with Paulo. And so it's going to be really interesting and really important to note whether or not they have him for this game. And then the last thing to talk about with them is Leonard Hamilton loves to play a lot of guys. I looked back. Virtually every game that Florida State has played this year, they've played 10, sometimes 11 guys, 8+ minutes. Like, he's going to go deep on his bench. And, for Duke, we've struggled a little bit with conditioning coming out of the COVID thing. You don't want to let Florida State, use that bench to make you tired and lean on you. So those are the things I've got on this game.
I'm glad you brought up the depth, because as much as I'm going to tell you about a handful of guys that are particularly interesting for Florida State, the fact remains that whether Osborne is available or not, Florida State's going to cycle through a lot of guys, and they're going to keep guys fresh. Nobody is playing, or almost nobody plays over 30 minutes a game. Like, it's rare for guys to play 30 minutes in a game for Florida State, even the most talented players on this team. And Jason, you pointed out the size. Leonard Hamilton always brings size. Like, it doesn't matter how much turnover there's been on this team. Somehow Leonard Hamilton just finds big dudes to play for him. And they are often talented. This season, as you pointed out, somewhat disappointing relative to what I would think are normal Florida State expectations. They can absolutely still make the tournament, but they are not going to be the 2, 3, 4, 5 seed type that they've been in recent seasons. If they're making the tournament this year, it's probably as a 8, 9, 10, 11 seed. As you pointed out, they're in the 50s in KenPom, and they don't have, as we will say with every ACC opponent, that many opportunities. They do get 2 games against Duke. So there are going to be 2 shots, but the one on Tuesday is the one that they get in Tallahassee. So once again, a game where Duke is coming in there to be the marquee opportunity for the opponent. I did want to move over and talk about some of the players. You highlighted Malik Osborne. He has been at Florida State for a few years. I think he's one of the guys that Duke fans will recognize, and whether he plays in this game is going to be key for FSU, because obviously he's essential, especially around the glass. And as you pointed out, likely the guy that would match up with Paulo Banchero sort of most often. They have sort of similar physical profiles, and Florida State brings dudes who are true centers that I think will match up more obviously against Mark Williams and Theo John. But the highlight sort of standout player for FSU this season, I believe, is Caleb Mills, who's a transfer point guard. He comes from Houston, where it was a sort of weird career for him at Houston. His freshman season, he was excellent there. He comes in as an academic junior. I cannot comment anymore at all on what years anyone is in terms of eligibility because it's all messed up during COVID. But Caleb Mills had an outstanding freshman season at Houston. He was the AAC's preseason player of the year headed into last season. So that would be the 2020-2021 season, which would have been the weirdest COVID year, I think. He only played the first handful of games. He dealt with some injuries. I believe he dealt with COVID early in the season and then basically just removed himself from the team early in January. So like this time last year, Caleb Mills was he was sort of opting out of the rest of the season. It looked like he was going to transfer, but the circumstances around it were kind of weird, especially given that coming into the season, he had such high expectations. He had only been a 3-star recruit, but came in with all the expectations. So last season he opts out, he doesn't play most of the season, and then chooses to transfer to Florida State. So he is now one of the star players for Leonard Hamilton, has been having just an absolutely excellent season for them, acting as their point guard, but grabbing some rebounds. He's not the best shooter, or he's not the best scorer, rather. He's a pretty decent shooter from outside, shoots 38% from three, very respectable, and something that I think that any Duke players shooting it at any reasonable volume would love to have. He's also a North Carolina native, so it's going to be. I'm sure that this is one of those games where he gets excited to play against teams that I'm sure he grew up watching on TV all the time.
So I got a quick comment about Caleb Mills. You're going to love this, guys. So I was looking at Ken Pomeroy does a thing where if you click on an individual player, it'll tell you who that player is most similar to over their career. At this moment in his career, Caleb Mills is one of the guys he's most similar to is Sindarius Thornwell of South Carolina, who absolutely.
Oh, I don't like that.
Oh no, yeah, exactly. I saw the name and I was like, oh no, yeah, folks. If you don't remember, Duke was knocked out of the NCAA tournament. Jason Tatum's freshman year, his 1 year on campus, by South Carolina. And Sindarius Thornwell was their star, and he just absolutely torched Duke in that game. So I'm just hoping Caleb Mills does not do a Thornwell on us this time.
We also pointed out that Florida State is tough on defense. Caleb Mills is the head of that effort. So it'll be curious to see, given how much size Florida State has, sort of who's matching up with who. I assume that Mills is going to be matching up on Trevor Keels, but that'll be kind of an interesting matchup to watch, especially on the defensive side for Florida State. A couple other guys that are sort of interesting for them. You mentioned Malik Osborne. We'll see if he plays in this game. But Florida State also has a true center who is 7-footer John Butler. This is a guy who is, he's not playing the most minutes on this team, but is one of these big rim protector type guys. Another player who's fascinating for them, who's not a returning player, he's a freshman, is Matthew Cleveland. And I'm curious, Jason, if you remember Matthew Cleveland as a high school player, because he's an Atlanta native and I believe went to Pace Academy. So possible you would have seen him.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I know Pace Academy really well. I don't recall Matthew Cleveland at all from Pace Academy, but I know that school pretty well.
Almost certainly. I mean, I don't know how many years he played there, but he's a real 5-star recruit for them. I believe right now he's coming off the bench. But coming off the bench in a very significant way. You could say coming off the bench in the way that AJ Griffin was until very recently for Duke, where he's playing a really significant role. He is also kind of in that similar sort of mid-size guy. He's a wing player, can score, can play a lot of defense. So another guy that is going to be interesting to see how Duke matches up against. And, Florida State, as well as Leonard Hamilton does as at putting a roster together, he's not often getting a ton of 5-star guys. Obviously, they've had a little bit more success in that recently, but Matthew Cleveland would definitely be a highlight recruit for Leonard Hamilton. He was ranked 25th in the class coming into or at the end of his senior year last year, and has been really great for Florida State early in the season here. So that's going to be a guy to watch. Wonder if he will stick around for a sophomore season, or if he's just going to be so great as a super sub as a freshman that he goes into the draft.
By the way, their previous game against Syracuse, when Malik Osborne did not play at all, did you see who they started instead of Malik Osborne? They went sort of deeper down their bench and they started Naheem McLeod who is a 7'4", 255-pound player. 7'4". Now, I don't think Naheem McLeod, if they start him against Duke, Paulo Banchero is just going to take that guy on the perimeter. There's just no way Naheem McLeod at 7'4", 255 has the speed to stay in front of Paulo. But I was just intrigued that they started him and John Butler. So they started 2 7-footers against Syracuse. Whew. Florida State is big.
He is no Taco Fall, though. Let's be clear. I mean,
true.
He can be beat.
A couple other guys just that are worth kind of pointing out. Jason, you mentioned Raekwon Evans, who's the smallest rotation player on the team and is still pretty good. He's kind of their second guard, their shooting guard. So he's in
his 9th season there, I think, right? I feel like Raekwon Evans.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, he's been there since before we started doing the podcast.
And another interesting transfer. Leonard Hamilton has done a good job this year on the transfer market, because I mentioned he got Caleb Mills, who came over from Houston, but he also has former big prospect Cameron Fletcher, who was at Kentucky last season and is now at Florida State. So a guy who comes with some pedigree. I think he was underwhelming last year from Kentucky. Duke didn't get to play them last year, but a guy who certainly comes in with his own expectations. He's coming off the bench for them right now. He's another bigger guy. He'll be a backup big, but expect him to get some good minutes for Florida State. If it's not in this game, then at some point in this season. So that's kind of the preview on their guys. But as we said, they're running 9 or 10 deep on this roster. It is not the way Duke puts their roster together. So it is definitely going to be a matchup of conflicting playing styles. Florida State likes to rotate guys in and out a lot. They slow the ball down a lot on defense. So the thing that I'm going to be interested to see is how much is Duke able to run the break, speed Florida State up, get easy baskets, get transition baskets. If Duke is forced to play in the half court more, that really plays into Florida State's plans here. And I wonder if the Duke offense is ready to combat a defense that slows it down and plays very deliberately like that. Of course, this is one time where Duke has to play that way. Duke also has to play Virginia at some point. So you might as well get your licks in playing a tough, slow defense in preparation for the Hoos, if nothing else. So we will look forward to the game on Tuesday, but right now we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, Jason had an interesting encounter this weekend, so we need to catch you up on that. It should be an interesting conversation about a former Duke assistant who is now a head coach. Stick around. As we mentioned, we have some special audio that we need to play for you, and I'm going to let Jason explain the whole situation here because it's a pretty fun story, even outside of the content that we're going to share with you.
Yeah, there's a whole thing happening here. So as folks know who listen to this podcast, I love to speak and have people hear my voice, and part of that is I am the public address announcer for the Galloway School, which is the school that my 2 sons attended. It's actually where I also went to school here in Atlanta. When they have basketball games, I'm the voice of the Scots. They are known as the Scots, and I'm the voice of the Scots. So the other day, just a couple days ago, I was calling the game. I'm sort of quiet and reserved when the other team scores, and I get very excited and, doing all kinds of funky stuff with my voice when Galloway scores. And at halftime of the game, someone in the stands comes up to me and he says, are you Jason Evans? I'd never seen him before. I didn't know who he was. And I went, yes, I am. Do I know you? I apologize. I don't recognize you. And he said, my name's Jeff Feldstein. I'm Duke class of 1993. And I recognized your voice. I listened to your podcast. And he'd heard me announcing and he was like, wait, I know that guy. He said he listens to us on 1.5 speed because he listens to us while he's jogging and it makes him run faster. So Jeff Feldstein, big fan of the podcast and heard me. And
I do that too. I'm a very big 1.5x.
Can I ask Jeff? Can I ask Jeff a question? Jeff, I also am a sped up podcast listener. I do not think this is an uncommon practice.
I do 1.5.
I find that
yeah.
I can't listen to our show at 1.5 speed. I think we speak too quickly. So, sir, you must have better sense of hearing than I do. And it's funny, there are moments where like my earbuds will get disconnected, and my girlfriend will hear the podcasts that I'm listening to, and she'll be like, I don't understand how you can do that. So, Mr. Feldstein, I am impressed with you, sir, that you can listen to this show at 1.5.
Real quick, I will say I do listen to this podcast in 1.5x for the reason, Sam, that you just alluded to make sure that I can listen to myself and say, hey, I need to slow myself down sometimes when I speak. And it's something that my dad talks about all the time, but it's very, very informative for me as I do all these podcasts to listen at a speed that most people listen to, so I know to slow down.
But Jason, that's not even the best part of the encounters that you had this weekend at this basketball game.
Continue, please.
Yes. So that's the preamble to all of this. So I'm sitting there, I'm calling the game, and I look across the gym, and it's worth noting that Galloway, the team that I was calling, has a player who his name is Anthony Arrington Jr. We call him Ant. Ant is arguably the best player that our school's ever had. We're not a great basketball power. So I look across the gym, and look, I'm old. I don't have great vision. Everyone's wearing masks, but I see a guy and I'm like, wow, that's a big dude. That guy just sitting there. He's so large that he looks out of place. And he was wearing, he's wearing like a sweatsuit. Didn't look like he was related to any of the players. And I noticed there was like an emblem on the sweatsuit, but it wasn't like a Nike or anything like that. And my son was there with me. My son went to Galloway, and he'd come with me to watch the teams play, because our teams are really good this year. They're both ranked in the top 10 in the state. And I said to him, I go, Drew, my son's name is Drew. I'm like, Drew, I think that might be Nate James. And Drew goes, wait, the Duke player? Why would he be here? And I said, well, Nate's the head coach of Austin Peay now, and he might be recruiting Ant. And Drew's like, no way, come on, really? And I'm like, yeah, I think. Now, again, the guy's wearing a mask, but when the game ended, I went over, I looked at him, and I'm like, I'm like, Nate. And Nate knows me because I've interviewed him several times as part of this podcast. And so Nate and I chatted for a couple minutes. He was, in fact, I'm not sure. I don't think I'm giving anything away. I hope I'm not revealing anything to say that Nate was there recruiting Anthony Arrington Jr. Austin Peay had a game get canceled, and so Nate sort of had a free night, and he decided to fly to Atlanta and look at a player for Galloway. I was so excited about it. But Nate agreed to come with me. We walked over to sort of a side of the gym that was a little bit quieter, and I chatted with him just a little bit. I'm about to play that audio for all of you, just talking to him about how things are going at Austin Peay, and also you're going to hear some news in here about the Coach K transition and what Nate and the coaching staff knew about Coach K's decision to retire. All right, so Nate, the first question I got for you, I got to ask, what's it like coaching at Austin Peay? Very different from being at Duke, right?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. It's whenever you move over a seat and you're no longer making suggestions, but you're the one that everyone's looking at for the answers. So, that's that you're in a hot seat then. But really enjoying it, and obviously trying to take as much as I can, all the things I've learned from Coach K being at Duke, and trying to help my group. And it's an honor, obviously, to be a head coach and be the leader of some young man in a university that's giving me the honor and the privilege of being a head coach. But it's a lot different when you move over a chair.
Now, you were saying earlier, you knew when you took the job that Coach K was about to retire, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's something that he's talked about over the years, and like every year is one of those, hey, this could be my last year, guys, and then the next year comes, hey, this could be my last year, guys, So you know that it's coming closer and closer towards the end. But you don't know exactly when. But then when he says, hey, guys, this is it, you prepare for it, and you go out there and you show up to work every day even harder, because you know that the time with the GOAT is running out, and you want to give your all for him. And I felt bad during my last year because it was our COVID year. And, Cameron wasn't Cameron.
Right,
It's no fans. And I think that was the first year that, we've missed the tournament, and only God knows how long. So, my last year with Coach wasn't the way I wanted to go out, and But to see him this year, and then when I do have opportunity to, watch my Duke guys get up and down, I'm always cheering for them, and I want them to really appreciate every second they have with Coach.
Okay, so as an opposing coach now, you said you've watched them a little bit. What's your assessment of this year's Duke team?
Oh man, I tell you, I wouldn't want to play them. I tell you that. They're loaded. I think they're playing together. They're playing tough. And they're like an old Duke team in terms of how hard they play on the defensive end. I think they check all the boxes in terms of the guard play, the shooting, the versatile guys, the big guys who's protecting their basket, great guys coming off the bench. So they're a handful, but I really enjoy watching them. And my guys, Carrawell and Shire and Nolan, and my man Emil Jeffrins is back there on staff. So and whenever I get a chance, opportunity to watch them, I do so.
Hey, before we go really quick, have you talked to John Shire at all about moving into the big job?
No, not right now. Every now and then he'll text me something and we'll joke. But, I just want him and all the guys on the staff to really, just soak up every second of working for Coach and learning from him and just experiencing everything that comes with, this last season of Coach K.
Okay, and actually last thing I want to ask you is give me an assessment of where Austin Peay is now and where you hope to take the things.
Well, right now we're in the building stages, and anybody who's ever built anything, they know that there's a lot of hard times, a lot of frustrating times, a lot of angst of building and trying to create. And right now we're laying a foundation. We're trying to figure out, what direction in terms of recruits and who to bring in, and we're going to lose some seniors, and so just in the building process. But I'm really enjoying it, and I think over time, just like I've done all my life, I've won and I've figured it out, and I plan on doing the same thing here at Austin Peay.
I love it. That's perfect. Thanks a lot, Nate.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So as you heard, when Nate, there are people who didn't know if when Nate left for the Austin Peay job, if he knew that Coach K was retiring and that John Shire was going to be selected. And now it's, Nate has confirmed that they all knew that Coach K was going to announce his retirement plans. And I guess they probably also knew that John Shire was the guy who was going to get the job. And that's probably one of the reasons that Nate decided to move on, because Nate and John Shire had both been there for a pretty good length of time. And there was some perception that they were sort of two of the front runners for taking over for Coach K. And it's also, great to hear Nate talk about how things are going there and his recruiting and what he's building and the such. He's a really impressive guy. Anytime you're around him, anytime you talk to him, you can sense that he has a good head on his shoulders. And I think he's really going to do some good things at Austin Peay. And it'd be really fun. I hope that he ends up offering a scholarship to Anthony Arrington and that Ant gets to play there, because it'd be really fun for me to have a guy I know playing for a Dookie.
I think it's interesting when he mentioned that he kind of knew that Coach K was about to announce his retirement. I feel like that's kind of what we had insinuated, or at least speculated on, because of how quick it happened, right? Like, he may not have announced it in April, but when he left, we talked about the article that Brendan Marks from The Athletic wrote about the process of getting to the situation where Coach K was going to retire and John Shire was going to take over. They mentioned that he had just left when Coach K had gathered the other staff in the locker room and said, "Hey, I'm about to retire." So I feel like this was something where, again, we even talk about some of these things where, hey, is there a spot opening up here? And you see guys that will eventually take a job and leave the program to go and lead a program somewhere else. And it's because of some of the shuffling of the deck chairs, right? But I think in that case, it was definitely, hey, this is a good opportunity for me, but also there's going to be some changes around here very soon. And now that I have a chance to take this program, I can do that now, knowing that I'm not in the running for what is about to come down, Coach K about to retire. So I feel like he probably knew, and it didn't come as a surprise to me, but I do think that it started the rearranging and probably accelerated the timeline a little bit in Coach K making his announcement to his staff that says, hey, this is what's about to happen.
It felt like reading that article and reading some of the other stuff that came out around the announcement of Coach K's retirement and John Shire getting the the job to replace him. Jon Scheyer getting that role it sounds like it was more inevitable from those inside the program. So Nate was probably like, look, it's not like my role would even be changing here. So why not go start getting my head coaching experience? I don't want to speculate about different members of the Duke family sort of looking at like, oh, what happens if Jon Scheyer fails? And what happens if the Duke job is open again in a few years? Like, am I in the right position for that? Whether it's that job that Nate eventually wants or it's some other job, you might as well get going on that. Nate's not that young either. He's already in his 40s. So it's certainly time for him to be getting experience as a head coach. And I think when we talked about him getting that job back in April of last year, because he got that job basically right after the season ended, I don't know that the Austin Peay job is quite as high profile as some of the other recent jobs that Duke assistants have left for, jobs like Pitt, Northwestern, Stanford, Marquette, that other recent assistants have gone to. But it's a program that's sort of in the same vicinity as Duke. I'm sure that Nate doesn't have to go that far to recruit tons of talent for a school that's over in Tennessee. Obviously he's flying to Atlanta to see players that Jason sees on a regular basis, but a good opportunity for him. And it was cool to catch up with him and hear that he's still keeping some tabs on the program.
By the way, do you guys know who the best player is on Austin Peay this year?
I don't know who the best player on Austin Peay is this year.
I only know because I looked it up. It is Caleb Stone Carrawell. You can probably guess from that last name who Caleb's dad is.
Is he better or worse than the average Boeheim child?
It's a tough call. I'm not sure. He's averaging 13 points per game, and 3 rebounds and 2 assists. He's their leading scorer. Probably worse than
Chris
the Boeheims
Carrawell.
right now.
Chris Carrawell has a son who's a college basketball player.
Yes, he does.
Man, he got on that quickly because it's only 2022. Chris Carrawell graduated from college 22 years ago. So they grow up fast.
They do. But anyway, I hope, I know Nate is looking to, remake the Austin Peay squad. Austin Peay has not been very good this year. It's not really Nate's fault that, he was dealt a hand and he's trying to do the best he can with it. And I know he's looking to remake his roster over the next couple of years. But it sounds like Caleb Stone Carrawell is a keeper.
All right, so we will leave the conversation there. We, of course, will be back after the Florida State game to recap that and preview the game that will follow it, which is Duke is playing Syracuse in Durham this coming weekend on Saturday. So we'll preview that game later in the week after the FSU game. But until then, stay in touch with us. Hey,
Sam, how much are Syracuse at Durham tickets going for?
I was talking to you guys about this earlier. Yeah. Not as much as I expected. So Duke fans, if you want to get in the door, you can get in there for under $1,000, which is what I thought was going to be the asking price for Duke Syracuse tickets in Cameron this season. But don't snatch up all the tickets in case we need them.
2 people for less than 1,000. That's
yeah, exactly. So pretty impressive. Okay. Until then, stay in touch with us. DBR Podcast at gmail.com. I think we told you on the last episode that we'd love to hear your headlines from these games, because we try to come up with them and be clever, but we do not have a monopoly on that activity. So send us those, send us other thoughts, send us anything. We love it. We love interacting with people. Rate and review all the places that you get podcasts. I'm sure every podcast host that you listen to tells you the same thing. For Jason Evans, for Donald Wine, I am Sam Klein. This has been episode 380 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Duke Band, take us home. On the topic of old comedy, I recently came across, how George Carlin was one of the guys on the Thomas the Tank Engine show.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. He played Mr. Conductor.
Yes.
I came across a series of YouTube videos that's George Carlin as Mr. Conductor, but with George Carlin stand-up spliced into the, it's there's There's probably an hour of it on YouTube. It's amazing.
That's amazing.
It's really, really, really good. I'll find some of the links and send them to you.
I mean, that's great. That is brilliant.
Big George Carlin fan. So this was a gold mine for me.